So I'm Ben Snow. I'm a visual effects supervisor at Industrial Light and Magic, and I've been working there since about 1994, with a brief sojourn over to Weta for King Kong. But most recently, I just finished Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. Before that, I did the Iron Man films and Terminator Salvation, and several other films. So on Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, it was a little different from the previous Pirates of the Caribbean films that ILM had done, in that we didn't have as much of the film, as much of a big chunk of the film as we had on previous films. Moving Picture Company and Cinesight both did other portions. And we also, at ILM, worked with a couple of other companies as partners doing some of the work. But the bulk of the work that we were responsible for was the big mermaid attack sequence that happens early, well, moderately early in the film. And then also some sequences where Blackbeard has captured some ships and got them in these little bottles. They're like bottle ships, but they're actually the full-size ships that have been magically shrunken down. And then the end sequence with the Fountain of Youth, where they find a way into the Fountain of Youth, and the climax of the film takes place. And so for those Fountain of Youth sequences, we worked with Scanline, which was very good, and we also worked with a couple of other companies, including Olin, on some of the other stuff. But all of the Mermaid stuff was done at ILM, except for a wider shot of a ship going down that NBC did. So the big challenge for us was really the mermaids. Dealing with the mermaids, dealing with the fact the film was in 3D, and dealing with all of the issues of all of the water and the interactions and that sort of stuff. So, a variety of stuff there. Well, the mermaids, one of the first challenges was actually the design process on them. It was something that this filmmakers already had some artwork that they'd done on the mermaids, but there wasn't anything that had really grabbed them yet. And so we got this great opportunity to actually contribute design. And so one of the ILM art directors, Aaron McBride, and I went down to talk to the director and find out what he was after. He showed us quite a lot of different design that they'd done up till that point. And we talked about different images he found inspiring. And then we went back up to ILM and came up with some designs that he really reacted well to. So that was a really fun part of it, a fun challenge. What we set out to do was say, okay, we don't want to do the classic, mermaid like you saw in Splash and other films. We want to do something that's a little bit more like saying these are part people, but they're also part animal. And so the animators, for instance, rather than looking at the sort of classic monofin swimmer where you have her knees bent and they're really obvious, we tried to work out how can we break up the joints so it's more like a fishtail. So instead of the knee joint, although we still want a hint of that, we might have multiple joints, that sort of thing. So we looked at the whole anatomy of how this would work. One of the images that inspired Rob Marshall, the director, was an image which had a sort of glamour model on a beach in a sort of tail that was almost like a sheer fabric. And he really liked the fact that you got a hint of her legs through the fabric of this tail. And so that was a quality that he wanted us to think about. And so we actually took that and said, you know what, why don't we make it like the mermaid has a scaly inside, but then has this sort of almost like a jellyfish or a slightly translucent, transparent membrane over the top. And that might be useful because it might help us with the transformations and that sort of stuff. So coming up with that was definitely a challenge, but a really fun part of it. But then once we'd come up with that, it was, how do we execute all of this sort of thing? There was a lot of stuff that, we had to deal with the fact that the mermaids were fighting there was a lot of the mermaids and they were fighting. So, we had crowd scenes to deal with. So we had to work out ways to package up the animation. Because the mermaids in their design had a lot of trailing, beautiful, flowing tendrils and kelpie-like growths that came out of their hair. We did a lot of work to come up with ways to simulate that and then do it in a way that we could then transplant it between different models and across a pack of 50 mermaids, say. Ironically, of course, one of the biggest curveballs that hit us during the production was that quite late on during the production, the design changed. The director had always sort of been really, it was really important to him that our hero mermaid, Cyrena, she was a beautiful woman. But the argument had always been that the other mermaids that were attacking the sailors earlier on in the film could be a little bit more aggressive and creature-like, and be a little bit more different, not so human. But as the film sort of gelled, the director decided, you know what, I really want them all to be human. And so particularly when they're out of the water, they should pretty much just look like the actresses that we photographed. Now, of course, because these creatures attacking the pirates weren't going to be actress-like, we hadn't filmed actresses attacking the pirates. So anyone, you've seen through, all of the films where we've tried to make digital humans, it's a pretty big challenge, and particularly a big challenge to be faced with only a couple of months left in the production. So, we sort of collaborated with the director, tried to work out how we'd do this, and with the studio side effects soup, Charlie Gibson. And we decided to shoot some actual footage of people that we could use. And we actually had material for certainly a couple of the key performances. And then we had to step back and say, how do we make these creatures look more real? Instead of them having long, kelpy tendrils of seaweed, or more like real people, instead of them having long, kelpy tendrils of seaweed, they will have to have hair, which is a whole different can of worms. It's not, instead of simulating long cloth-like objects, you're now simulating individual hairs, and it's a big complication. So we said, you know what, we won't be able to do that. We're going to have to do things like colour them so that they look like hair. And one of the things that really worked in our favour was he really wanted to play it as quite mysterious and dark, and you don't really see what's going on. He felt it would be a lot scarier that way. And, it actually did work. So when we went with the more human look and we'd used the real people, and, we'd already really done a fairly thorough job of working out how to integrate the mermaid tails with the live actors, add scales to the live actors, because we were doing that with the main mermaid. It kind of worked. I think, it is still a scary sequence, and even though they're not as creaturey as we'd intended originally, that it's an interesting, and obviously people have reacted well to it and like it. So.